WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. This is the Way Savannah broadcast. Yes, my dear Drumfolk, freedom is the heart to make revolution, and thank you for joining in our liberation ceremonies. The mission of the WWS initiative, Which Way Savannah, you ask? To complicate, challenge, syncopate, dismantle, contrast, dissect, and break regularly adjusted narratives, and to suggest and demonstrate that accepted and expected neutrality produces unequal power flows. B, to provide multiple long-range alternatives which have well-researched, relatable, and useful knowledge benefits, ordinarily excluded from adjusted power flows. To assert consistent, serialized, and unapologetic countervailing narratives as normal practice. To indeed polyriddim. To operate always and in all ways in the spirit of Yaupin and Buna, the native and African indigenous customs of powerful discourse and dialogue accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee and social therapy. It's in this questioning spirit and thought world that we'll discover why Juneteenth is not the same as Stono commemoration, why the 4th of July can never be like the 5th of July remembrance, and why 1619 pales in comparison to 1527 insurrection. And why generally? Because freedom is the heart to make revolution, escape rebellion and freedom. Hello, this is Dr. David Pleasant presenting Which Way Savannah, Kanapaha theme of the month, Stono Not Jim Crow. Drumfolk is a power of the people, a power to the people, a spiritual force of encompassing eco-cultural resource. More than a drum, it is the drum of body, soul, and ethos which commands liberation as an entitlement of presence. The legacies of Drumfolk deserve much more than a telling through slavery. The Drumfolk are more than travel and leisure, hospitality, tourism, entertainment protocols, or industry. The Drumfolk legacy lives from the rebellion at Stono and well before it. In 1739, a group of weapon-wielding, mainly Christian Africans and Creolized people fought their way out of bondage by attacking plantation owners in South Carolina, Stono, South Carolina. Neither good masters or bad masters were spared. Stopping to occasionally drum and express themselves in movement, those avoiding capture made their way to Savannah, aided by local priests and later to Spanish Florida. A gateway was opened to a protracted war against enslavement and land capture further south. Seminole alliances and maroon causes later flourished. And now, the practical antithesis of Stono. As some might know, Jim Crow is an entertainment category which arguably signals the start of American entertainment industry. The brutal caricature of a disabled African enslaved man on a Virginia plantation became fodder for the dancer-mover Thomas Rice to mock in 1828. From the ragged clothes, degraded expressions, cork or grease paint, blackened face, ridiculous gestures, to the broken speech, a questionable star was manufactured. Thomas Daddy Rice became the most wealthy, famous, and prolific American entertainer businessman in the country. Many followed his lead, and blackface entertainment skyrocketed as an American cultural and consumer phenomenon. The degradation of the African body and intellect was key to it. As well, the subjugation of and Untermenschen, meaning lesser gaze, upon the African and colored body ascended as an internationally exported commercial cultural item. A byproduct of an Enlightenment patriarch, Kant, it was sent all over the world as an indication of the degraded status of colored people in general, and Africans in particular. After all, it flourished because the production value of the laugh, guffaw, or cry was more important than the genuine presence or substance of the human being. Indeed, it replaced that humanness with a distortion made to both titillate and distance. No matter how bad circumstances were for a white, or how mad they might get, at least he was not a The person was merely made into an object of entertainment protocol, a thing, lesser human or homunculus, which elicited a desired reaction or gratification for a fee, a delight for the price of a ticket. In other words, damn the circumstances of his poverty, hurt, raggedness, disease, or death. Is it funny? Will I be entertained? and that distancing, both in the words of patriot John Calhoun and in the celebrations of Calhoun in the writings of Adolf Hitler, goes like this. Concerning slavery, he said, the best guarantee to equality among the whites, it produces an unvarying level among them. It not only does not excite, but does not even admit of inequalities by which one man could domineer over another. The roots as such treatments were established in the same Enlightenment principles which fueled the American colonial empire were also fundamental to Nazi and Hitlerian views of a blighted other, Africans, natives, Jews, Roma, and etc. It as well paralleled the tolerated, accepted, and profit-filled slaughters in King Leopold's Congo extraction industries, the site of at least 20 million murders just within 2 decades before World War II. Modernity and progress exacted a great toll both in Africa and in the Americas. The great Savannah-born human rights advocate, Freddie Washington, made at least 2 great statements about white supremacy and its inherently fascist dimensions.
I am an American citizen, and by God, we all have inalienable rights. And wherever those rights are tampered with, there is nothing left to do but fight, and I fight. I do not ascribe to the stupid theory of white supremacy, and to try to hide the fact that I am a Negro for economic or any other reasons, I would be agreeing that being a Negro makes me inferior, and that I have swallowed whole hog all of the propaganda dished out by fascist-minded white citizens.
In the United States, Jim Crow morphed from an entertainment to include federally enforced segregation policies and customs, which, when paired with Ivy League eugenic science and social Darwinist theory, politically and juridically devastated blacks and others. Stono and the Legacies of Liberation directly countervail the characterization of both Africans and Native people as slave, homunculi, or victims. The clumsy, laughable, inept, or shiftless distortion of either an affable or acquiescent slave or plantation minion is replaced by inspired and inspiring freedom fighters, driven to assert an entitlement to liberty, no different than the bombs exploding in their heroes of supposed American independence. For either, freedom is more than something given, gifted, or proclaimed. It is rather an assertion, entitlement, and guarantee of equality and justice, indivisible. The ingratiating and grateful buffoon Jim Crow has no place when assertive, win, lose, or draw freedom fighters might be seen as center stage presence. A rejection of Jim Crow, however, is much more than some time lock reference. It is not to merely look at past relics or obsolete things or irrelevant museum items. It is to, in fact, examine the present. The obvious trappings of the caricature may be gone, yet the atmospheres, processes, customs, and protocols just as well exist now. The absence of declared, asserted, and powerful countervailing presence lags far behind. It still does. At the same instance, the view of empire, the coastal empire, its architectures, customs, protocols, and arrangements remain. Jim Crow is as well enabled in the present as the present. The fight spoken of by Freddie Washington is one which must continue. The old-time images are replaced with new, acceptable, and palatable substitutes which, in their implementation, give back the same results as before, namely the exclusion of liberation ethos presence or exposition among African and Native people. Along with that, you get a skewed balance of power, authority, wealth, justice, say-so, or epistemology. Stono is the liberation reservoir, yet unlike Juneteenth, it directly involves Savannah and the surrounding region. Tragically, it is resolutely avoided as a central part of the liberation ethos or regular historical reference. The battle yell, which I personally popularized and spread across the USA and elsewhere, they took the drums away, but they could not stop the beat, had been usurped by those willing to exploit its power, yet turned their backs on a full acceptance and commemoration of its Stono plus origins and consequences. For Africans and native people of this Savannah region, many opportunities other than a colonial, Confederate, and/or antebellum story exists. The inclusion of them, however, as they might accompany more of the established narrative or as additions to an all-in-this-together multicultural narrative, as well misses the mark. The skews generated by chattel slavery, forced removal, land dispossession, Jim Crow segregation, terror, protracted omission, contrived education, gratitude to philanthropists, and etc. cannot be remedied by simple inclusion or proliferation of others as a single category. A remedial, after-the-fact injury justice may never be due when an indivisible, preemptive of harm justice is an entitlement. A focused, steadfast, and long-term initiative is due. It is one which might position Stono and more as central freedom, justice, equality, and liberty themes as genuinely universal tenets of a practiced reality rather than an oblique and segregated giveaway, holiday, celebration, or contribution honoring. Stono and Drumfolk name and reclaim a liberation legacy and ethos of power and freedom, unapologetic, unrepentant, and regionally specific. The practices of a lesser gaze exploited in chattel slavery, profited in Jim Crow entertainment, and carried into accepted disparity, generated and continues to generate tragic consequences. As mentioned earlier, the protocols of Nazism and as well the encomium of Hitler himself comes from people, places, science, practice, and jurisprudence from the early American colonial, antebellum, Confederate, and Jim Crow empire, America. In many ways, the Wehrmacht was the skeuomorph of American empire. Monotone, less nuanced, flavor and spice-free, the Nazi-Aryan model proffered directly potent and brutal episodes rather than long-term protracted violence. Even today, the Nazi model reproduces the tragic sight or perpetrator sight as a form of touristic enterprise, dark tourism. The American model unleashes a nuanced distress locale which exalts flavor, spice, and sauce as a cover for the omission of genuinely balanced participation or authorship. In short, a full telling of Native and African narratives, particularly insurrection narratives, is omitted. The rules come from one source, no matter the color or orientation of the manager. Those rules as well reintroduce the same power and wealth distributions as before. The points of congruence between Nazi ideals and American colonial, Confederate, or antebellum protocols, the rules, however, are well documented. For this reason, if for no other, the desire to simply and comfortably enjoy amusement from the legacies of such connection may inspire a second look. The second look is to demand more balanced representation and promotion of countervailing points of reference. That is to open out more fully comprehensive presentations and expositions of humanity which explore the deeply complex nature of freedom and its expression. It is to declare, as the Article 1 of United Nations Declaration of Human Rights says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. In death camps like Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, and others, Jewish musicians were forced to entertain both prisoners and Nazi troops with fiddle music, jigs, jokes, and gestures as a form of torture by caricature. The guards openly mocked and imitated them. The practice bore great resemblance to the Jim Crow minstrelsy of the stage and of the plantation happy music mandates of masters in America. Music operated as a form of torture for both, not only as a forced directive of content and intent, but also as a way of replacing other opportunities for cultural affirmation, protest, or recrimination. For African Americans regarding drumfolk relationship of the Stono Rebellion, drums and other African practices seen at the insurrection were prohibited. Indeed, the intent of drumming or rhythmic music and motion were reduced to a confection devoid of particularly revolutionary intent or content. Festival, celebration, party, and fete were designed to consistently supplant resolute power, agency, authority, protest, and freedom from the drum. They took the drums away, but they could not stop the beat. The masters of yesteryear, and some argue even today, proffer happy music on non-threatening ceremonies, holidays, peaceful meditation, in place of any declared liberation agency and assertion. For African and Native people as well, the forces of music is a reservoir of authoritative cultural power, spirituality, clarity, and agency were conformed to tropes of celebration, industry, and spectacle at best, mocking plagiarism and contempt at worst. Music was a potent meditation and medication for power and an assertion of presence and authority. Yet a place of recreation, amusement, attractions, and entertainment has been manufactured and exploited, while a multidimensional heritage has been deliberately omitted. Any intent of threat, focus, protest, recrimination, or affirmation regarding liberation agency has been removed, leaving a classic Jim Crow design in the present, a censored, cleansed, sanitized, and even self-censored production value. Countervailing music emotion in opposition to racist rule, either at Auschwitz or on any plantation, have been met with militant force by guards, soldiers, overseers, or paddy rollers, respectively. Presently, as countervailing expositions of plantation life, colonialism, Confederate or antebellum counter-narrative either remain undeveloped or outrightly discouraged, a refreshed Jim Crow or fascist fiddles protocol guides audiences and consumers to a landscape devoid of genuinely countervailing content, away from focus and developed legacies of historiographic liberation power or any reflection on lingering tendencies of a past in the present. Entertainment, gratification, and comfort replaces the sometime probing and revelatory power of history. And just as before, damn the circumstances of his poverty, hurt, raggedness, disease, or death. Is it funny? Generates attractions, entertaining amusements, and fun. The emotional release of the gag might also release any sense of culpability, accountability, or urgency. The central tenet of Jim Crow entertainment, and arguably of all entertainment in general, both the fiddles of the Nazi death camps and the work-to-death life on plantations converge as a Jim Crow sustained so as to avoid a Stono design. Liberation as an entitled and leading assertion. Enjoyment, delight, and gratification are constructed so as to supplant genuinely full appreciation or empathy. This empathy is not to highlight sentimentality or sympathy, but rather to foreground dynamic agency of freedom-loving and seeking people who produced a trove of liberation efforts, events, and actions which still remain hidden, both deliberately and structurally. The Nazi camps and the prolific plantation expositions force us to reflect upon the present. They suggest that the neutral state of travel and leisure content, resource, and implementation might need to face the genuine music of resolute transformation. Stono, not Jim Crow, provides a gateway to more incisively evaluate the course and resource of change. We cannot merely see what is there right before our eyes. We must actually be willing to see what is purposely kept from our eyes and then reimagine a reality which refreshes prestige architectures which are so normally dominate our gaze and imagining. We must be willing to participate and engage in transformation. This critique includes all of the ceremonies, timelines, bullet points, celebrations, trivia, holidays, did you know-isms, and etc., which, through their foreground positioning, consistently push back other profound historiographic knowledge. Just as the books were kept from the enslaved, omitted and censored legacies act as a form of deprivation. People are nutritionally starved from otherwise edifying resources of cultural, epistemological, and actionable legacy. UN Article 5 of Declaration of the Human Rights, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In 1739, a group of weapon-wielding, mainly Christian Africans and creolized people fought their way out of bondage by attacking plantation owners. Those avoiding capture made their way to Savannah, the staging area before Spanish Florida. A gateway was opened to protracted wars against enslavement and land capture. From here, from Savannah in the region, Seminole alliances and maroon causes later flourished. We might look at this and ask, when might this and other liberation themes be mainstays of Savannah regional acknowledgement and serve to displace the manufactured colonial plantation and antebellum branding traded upon here, the new Jim Crow? Which way, Savannah? And now we move into the Yalpin and Boona segment of our show. Following a brief station break, we'll have a special guest, C.T. Brennan, host of the Oneness podcast. This is the radio broadcast Which Way, Savannah, promoting themes of escape, rebellion, and freedom to the power of indigenous community. To escape is to suggest a pathway, trail, a gateway to where or when freedom or liberty exists. Simply speaking, it is somewhere other than where you currently are. To rebel is to both demand, then establish freedom when and where urgent empowerment and agency manifests itself. In other words, liberty belongs to you and you create it in the place you command. Freedom or liberty is to know an existential circumstance with no spatial or temporal predicates, without either teleology or telemetry, with no beginning or end. The demand and declaration are self-evident. In short, freedom is a quality of consciousness no matter where you are, and you project it into every place you go. Oneness versus completeness. What does community mean when camaraderie or loyalty outweighs ethical standards, or when identity, inclusion, or diversity supersedes genuine liberty and justice? Stono rebellion is existentially a countervailing narrative to Jim Crow and plantation-centered narrative.
Bike Walk Savannah offers bicycle education programs for children and adults, including bicycle rodeos. Nationally certified instructors ensure that all education programs are safe, informative, and enjoyable for participants. They also offer customized programs for businesses and other organizations that are seeking to make bicycling and walking part of their employees' wellness programs. More information is available at bikewalksavannah.org.
The Live Oak Public Library System offers local residents access to hundreds of thousands of movies, television programs, albums, audiobooks, ebooks, and digital comic books for free on your streaming television and mobile devices through the Hoopla app. Supported devices include Roku, Fire, Apple TV, iPhone, and Android, among others. The selection is vast. All you'll need is your library card. Find the Hoopla app on your device and more information at liveoakpl.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
Today in our Yalpin and Boona segment, we have C.T. Brennan, activist, community builder, host of the Oneness Chat, and lover of humanity. Oneness. That is to investigate the possibility of harm when ideals of harmony, community, camaraderie, agreement, and etc. might distort a general sense of ethics. For example, in an extreme sense, in either the tenets of American patriotic figure John Calhoun or the protocols of Hitlerian nationalism, equality for all men was central. The issue arises when decisions about who it is that is considered a human being worthy of such entitlement. In a larger sphere, oneness may easily deal with the concerns of membership of closed groups or communities, while at the same time foreclosing on the safety, stability, or well-being of others who do not fit. A statement by John Calhoun, a celebrated figure of Savannah public square monuments, is exalted in Nazi writing. He said things like this: the best guarantee to equality among the whites, and now he's talking about slavery, it produces an unvarying level among them. It not only does not excite, but does not even admit of inequalities by which one white man could domineer over another. With patriotism or Nazism, the circle may be closed as to whom should benefit in oneness: slavery, segregation, or Jim Crow for one, or white supremacist nationalism for the other. In either case, The humanity of certain people is a serious matter underlying treatment, expectation, placement, respect, and etc. The organization underwriting the Oneness Chat has its founding authorities utter the following words in a book on world peace. Quote, "The inhabitants of a country like Africa are all as wandering savages and wild animals. They lack intelligence and knowledge. All are uncivilized. Not one civilized or a wise man is among them, not to be found. No matter how much the shell is educated or polished, it can never become a radiant pearl. The black stone will not become the world-illumined gem." In interrogating the scope and context of both subjects, a concerning issue arises about oneness. Does oneness, as an interest of completeness and ethical challenge, actually engage equality, or does it rather draw a distinction which authoritatively commands deference to higher models of presence, civilization, or being? So how do you feel about that question?
That question is a great question. My answer is, in my work towards oneness, I'm always striving. We're always striving towards equality. Have we obtained? No, we're not, because as you know, there's some issues in history that needs to be dealt with. We need to return to the past, look at some of the wrong that has been done, and acknowledge that. Rest there for a moment and have others who believe the same to agree with us and decide how we can move together and bring about healing for those wrongs that were done. And that's how we strive towards oneness. Surely we have not arrived.
Is one way of getting oneness by actually questioning or like encouraging questioning of things? I know, like, for oneness, it's about harmony, it's about people getting along, it's about a sense of community or camaraderie where, you know, people don't want to be in discord, disagreement, or have dissonance. They want to get along. But when you ask questions, and hard questions, sometimes that causes issues, and people don't necessarily want to hear that. They don't want to address things that are going to make them uncomfortable or upset.
As much as it does make people uncomfortable, we're going to have to be uncomfortable before we can get comfortable. Surely we are not going to engage in contention and have these conversations fraught with disagreements, but at the same time we will have to disagree. We will have to feel uncomfortable because it's a very uncomfortable situation. Recently I've found others who are ready, they say, to sit down and have those difficult conversations.
Now, the WWS Way Savannah initiative is committed to exposing, exploring countervailing narratives to the branded predominant themes in this region, like colonialism, Confederacy, and antebellum oligarchy. That view requires that equal time and expression be given to escape rebellion and freedom as a meaningful expression of liberation ethos alive and well in the psyches of indigenous people. Such expression cannot happen accidentally, can't happen obliquely or mysteriously. It has to be made as a committed action of love, equality, and genuine respect of humanity. So what we set out to do is, in fact, engage questioning, but also have dialogues like you're speaking about, where it doesn't decay or become like a fight, but it's a way of talking in a Yaupan and Buna sense, where there's a higher level of intervention, a higher level of engagement, and a way of actually bringing forth dialogue and discussion that expands the community's consciousness in a way. So how do you feel about that?
Expanding the community's consciousness. Dr. Martin Luther King said that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I stand with Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, at the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. So the question is, how do we get to that love?
I think another question in it too is, like, how do you deal with violence when it's thought of or codified a certain way. Like in this society, mainly violence is sort of in an episodic way. Let's say when I was making mention of the Nazi and Hitlerian things, violence was an episode mainly upon Jewish people or Roma people in Europe during a particular time period from the 30s on into the 40s. So it's one big event. But for African Americans, indigenous people, people of color, of different backgrounds, but particularly for African Americans and Native people, as one had their land taken away and the other was enslaved in this country, we still live in a condition where we're not totally free, where we still don't enjoy the full breadth and scope of liberty here, and where the consequences are that are existing because of that, like in terms of our epistemology. What do I mean? Like the way we see things, the way we live and allow our thoughts to generate activities or processes or practices or customs or thoughts even in education in our community. Let's say, for instance, Savannah, Georgia is built off colonialism, Confederacy, and antebellum like thought or ideas, ideals, a prestige architecture that drives tourism in the city, that drives travel and leisure interest, but also makes people think of how they think of themselves in very specific terms. So even when you deal with things as consequential as slavery or land dispossession, but particularly slavery and plantation life, our tendency is to view the world through that. So all of the other ways of understanding our liberation sensibility, like Maroonage, like the Seminole Wars, like our liberation ethos among the groups of people, like separate people who did things to liberate themselves, like the Stono Rebellion, like people out and out going against the system. Those things aren't thought of, or those things aren't encouraged, or in the worst sense, those things are actually kept back by groups that propose one idea about what unity is, or about what oneness is, or about what human, dignity is. But when it comes to people expressing their sense of that and their freedom, they don't encourage it. So that's my comeback about King's words, which I think are great and beautiful, but I guess it would be to expand what love is. That it's not just rosy and, as he actually called it, some sentimental bosh, but it's something very real and people have to work for it. Like Fred Hampton said, peace, but if you're willing to fight for it.
Okay. I used to revolutionary dream of taking America over with my corrective powers of analysis. And then one day I dug and realized that if I'm a natural woman doing what a woman does when she's truly natural, then we'll have revolution. Love can revolutionize this whole thing.
I think so, but I think in terms of what King was saying about love, like what kind of love are you talking about? Love as like some sentimental thing, or love as a matter of work and effort and focused principle? Because this change, even the things we're talking about now in terms of countervailing narratives in this city, because I'm addressing colonialism and plantation heritage and all that, either black or white side of it. If those things are the things that people see all the time and the kind of things that are presented all the time, then the other narratives, other ways, the countervailing histories, cultures, narratives never get a chance to, in fact, put those things on the table for people to deal with. Takes a certain degree of work. It takes work in terms of finding and understanding those things and contextualizing so people can see them, but also to get over the hump of people actually resisting them because they've become so comfortable with the ordinary ways that they deal with stuff here. I'm talking Savannah in specific, but for the country in general.
You're right. People are never going to want to deal with them. However, there will be some that recognize all the oppression that our people were under and still are under, and they're searching for answers. They're searching for ways to bring about that ultimate transformation. There's a place for all of what we're talking about here. There's a place for that countervailing narrative. Because you don't know what you don't know. A lot of us have not been privy to even comprehending some of the atrocities that occurs on a daily basis. Like we don't have a concept to even comprehend what's going on around us. So yes, there is a place for the countervailing narrative. I say, ultimately, this is a quote I'm reading, ultimately the power to transform the world is affected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine. Love, you and I, we both subscribe to Christian teachings, don't we? And we know that Christ talked about love. But this love is ablaze among members of a community. Love extending without restriction to every human being. This divine love is disseminated by enkindled souls, we being enkindled souls, through which intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities. How many times have we had someone to talk about loving the hell out of this situation, creating new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasions, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems so that they can gradually take on a new form of keeping with the requirements of humanity's age of maturity. That's a quote coming from the Universal House of Justice, the Baha'i Faith, the governing body of the Baha'i Faith.
Mm-hmm. And that's the governing body that has in its background, at least from its foundational membership, some of those things that I read earlier from Abdu'l-Baha, who said the things about Congolese Africans being beasts and savages and those sorts of things. In order to deal with things like that, like I think of Christ also in terms of his table turning. We went in there and told him, like, you can't make my temple a den of thieves. And that carries a lot of weight and a lot of meaning. Den of thieves, meaning maybe people who have turned everything into just a matter of mass consumption, but also a den of thieves, like a bunch of liars, too, or people who would put one sort of property ahead of another to, in fact, deceive people, okay? So when he turned those tables, it was about waking people up, and it was a very effective type of love. I guess what I'm getting at is that, you know, when we speak of love, it's easy for people to fall into like a kind of mindfulness thing where love would be just some easygoing kind of hold hands, sing together. Even what Kumbaya, which comes from down this way, even that song, and it just become that sort of thing. And it doesn't take the level of urgency and energy and participation to actually turn things around or transform things, even in terms of what the country is supposed to stand for justice and for equality, for freedom, for equality between all men, all women, all human beings. But for people to, in fact, assert that on their own historically, what they call diachronically, through time seems to be a great challenge, not just for a Baha'i community or for a Christian community, but throughout the country as a whole. And I don't know if it's one particular religious group that would have a handle on it or another, but a matter of seeing kind of past or beyond the things that are thought to be good because they're in religion, or maybe taking a hand from Howard Thurman, helping us to see that things are in religion because they are good. And if we, in fact, approach things from that way, we'll know what that common thread might be. And people won't turn shy away from things that might disturb them or not support things or be apathetic to or be enabling to things that are actually harmful to us. I must be honest to say that a lot of the groupings that I've seen here either enable things or they don't participate or they're apathetic outright to things that would disturb them or things that might not fall into the normal category or the normal cadence that they're used to. This is a hard nut to crack here in this place in particular, maybe in the country as a whole, but particularly here in a place where, one, you have a majority black population, then you have historiographic sort of references or opportunities that are completely folded in on themselves, meaning that they can't get out. Not because they can't get out, they don't have the power to, but because certain organizations, peoples, communities, groups of people, enclaves, and otherwise stop that from happening. To me, the greatest form of love is truth. Christ said that. Baha'u'llah said that. All religions talk about truth. And if you hide the truth, if you don't expose the truth when you know it's there, or if you put it under a bushel basket, then you're doing a great harm, for some a great sin. So engaging truth in a certain way and being open to it and enabling that truth, that means participating and not being apathetic, is a major thing and a beautiful thing. And people can't really sit back on that or hide from that when they don't do that, when they don't participate, when they're apathetic, when they actually enable things that are hurtful and harmful.
Absolutely. You know that the state of the nation is apathy. And this country was built on some very disturbing principles that has caused the country to fold in on itself. I say we don't look to any religious group. We just look to a group of people who desire to bring about change. And transforming this world means one must not be afraid to take the first step. The first step for me is to operate in love and have these difficult conversations and walk together in unity. Can it be done tomorrow? No, it cannot. But all this warring, we know that we want this society to be transformed, our communities to be transformed. And legislation is not the answer. Religion is not the answer. However, complete change in the hearts of mankind is the answer. I can love you because my heart is loving. My heart has received enough love from divinity to love all of mankind. That's the thread that I'm reaching for.
In thinking about that and thinking about truth and love and things that have to be brought out, and even peace, these are all, again, I'll return to this, that if it's love, what love? And it's a love that has to be interrogated. Justice disciplines love, because it won't allow love just to be willy-nilly about some pleasure-seeking or sentimentality or that sort of thing. It won't allow the boss to happen. It will discipline it so that everybody has a respectful place in society, in their co-relationships with one another, in their communities, and that those communities don't serve as interests to lock other people out or to ostracize them or to minimize other people's sense of humanity, which I've seen like in the Hitlerian thought I raised, in the statements of Abdu'l-Baha, and definitely in the practice of the United States from its inception, all men are creative, then you're not. Because you still stay a slave. So it's a matter of looking at things like love, truth, justice, and peace as things that have to be constantly, like in a sort of active or agency-driven profile. It's not something that just sits there. Like love doesn't just sit there. It's something you have to do something with. You have to work with it. So forms of violence I'll return to again. There's what I call peaceful violence or silent violence. We live in that when there's not a war necessarily on or declared, but there's a so-called peacetime circumstance, but the kind of things that happen in that harm people and hurt people. Native American people, African American people, we've been living in this for many, many years. You have industries, you have laws, you have juridical processes, you have penal system, police force that are during a peacetime where there's no declared wars, but the casualty rate from that is just like a war. We're harmed. We have medical difficulties. We're literally choked to death or shot to death and all those. So these are forms of peaceful violence that may occur in the absence of discernible weaponry or mechanism, yet their effects may be far-reaching and protracted, most notably in the tendency of them to occur without immediate recognition or amelioration. This lack of awareness is particularly notable when other more episodic and visually catastrophic harm is present. The damage done by peaceful violence, however, carries a harm, a looming threat or terror which may be even more devastating over time, diachronically, than other plainly visible events. It allows for an aggregated damage to build and snowball. Inattention to such damage produces and reproduces immediate crises which otherwise wind up being the prime concerns. So only when something is like happening is direct, it's like episodic, like do we take the opportunity to say, oh, there's a problem or a crisis. So when you said earlier, it won't happen tomorrow, it won't happen overnight. True, but when it came to the American Revolution and people declaring themselves, as Calhoun talked about, which I raised before, as what American people expect. They expect it to be overnight, and they have a give me freedom or give me death sort of understanding and consciousness about who they are. They expect it right away. The great writer James Baldwin asked in an interview, he said, well, how long is it going to take? Is it going to take 50 more years? It took my father's life, took my grandmother's life. Now I'm living, I'm almost gone. I ain't seen it yet. When's it going to happen? So we can't wait forever. So it can't be willy-nilly in the sense of, whenever it happens, it happens. There has to be some effort, and there also has to be brought to bear some form of balance in it, meaning that if indeed other Americans feel that they want and will have don't tread on me freedom, or give me liberty or freedom, give me freedom or give me death right now, and they have a revolution and they get it the next day, we deserve the same. That's our entitlement as human beings. We deserve no less. And perhaps it's something in our learning to love, which also I think is similar to a King Tyler, one of his books, or The Strengths of Love. We're finding that what love actually means and how it can be activated and used as a form of agency for actual transformation.
The question, give me the question. You said a lot. You said a lot. A lot of it is agreeable. Of course, I agree with what you said because it's the truth. And the truth is the truth in every language and every religion. However, it's my belief that we're on the same page. We desire to see a transformation in this society. And you're saying let it not be willy-nilly, but let it have a specific date in mind.
A specific urgency and agency, not date.
Specific urgency and agency, which will be a date. It wouldn't be 50 years and 50 years and 50 more years. Myself, I have suffered from post-traumatic slave syndrome. Just fighting to have this conversation, just fighting to be in the moment. That's where I'm at. I'm looking to bring about healing for me, my family, because as you said, there's so many inequities in this society. I know that warring and having the battle of the bullet would not serve me any, because I don't even own a weapon. I don't even have a gun. So the only weapon I have is how to love and transform in that manner.
Well, King called it a revolution of values. And King said that we need to get the revolutionary spirit. And that means a sense of urgency and a sense of intensity and not a willy-nilly kind of take on either love or truth or value, particularly for ourselves. So that has to be something that we insist upon. That's even the title of Max Roach and Abby Lincoln album back in the 60s. They call it We Insist, because that was something that was kind of missing in our community. And I would include that today in the Savannah region community definitely is missing. We insist, like we want this like now, and this is a demand that we make and one that we fulfill through our own agency.
Absolutely. You and I working together. How do we go straight down to City Hall and insist that some changes be made in our community? How many backers do we have? How many of us are prepared to make this love walk, these love values and truth in society? How many are with us?
Well, my answer to that is like I wouldn't be going to City Hall for that, because that's not the entity that I would trust would do it. There are a lot of other places you can go to start the conversations. One would be the places that are supposed to recognize our heritage consciousness in this area and aren't doing a balanced job of that, and that we insist that those things are placed there. Some has to do with the media, a media who has failed us in great part because they're doing things, and I'm talking about local media. They have supported things in the past that were quite heinous. Everything from J.B. Stoner to Lester Maddox ads and commentaries in the newspaper that were against, the Accommodations Act, that is, freedom and justice for black people just going to a restaurant, to a movie theater, or to a hotel. They were against those kind of things. So how do we insist now that those very same entities, those so-called heritage centers, bully heritage centers, I would call them, or the media now start advocating for, through our direction, things that people don't know and don't get to see, by not regurgitating the same plantation narratives and things like that, or the same trivia points or travel and leisure entertainment protocols, but actually start doing more substantive stuff to get people to know who they really are and to embrace that.
True indeed. This discussion that we're having, it's my belief that it will go on for a while. It will go on for a while. We have many issues before us. Let's continue the fight. Let's continue to walk in love. Let's continue to have these countervailing narratives, and with urgency, like you say. Let's just continue it.
And like CT says, and Freddie Washington said too, let's fight. Let's continue to fight. And that takes on many different forms. So thank you, C.T. Brennan, for sitting in today and having this discussion, talking about these things, reading the quotes you had, and me saying my crazy stuff and quotes. And I appreciate sitting here with you and talking.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and look forward to coming again.
In our next segment, we have the WWS-generated program, Eco-Cultural Concepts, a news and commentary profile of multidimensional ecological meaning in our world. In this Eco-Cultural Concept segment, we highlight the upcoming WWS event at Stono River, South Carolina, where we'll actually go on a camp out in the general area of the Stono Rebellion. I've invited a number of guests, including my mentee group, the internationally renowned dance theater, Step Africa. I've mentored, guested with, and trained that group for more than 15 years, first introducing them to both the Stono and Drumfolk concepts, and also to the scope in which African-based rhythmic treatments perform as larger cosmological interests, a combined African and native indigenous ethos. We enter today's eco-cultural corner looking at the types of organic materials, edible and utilitarian, that Africans and Native people may have encountered during their protracted efforts to live free. When they raided plantations, it was not necessarily a matter of lack. They knew how to live with the land and how to stay nomadic, producing lesser harm to the natural environment of their general war and life theater. Their actions against plantations worked as a form of redress, protest, and countervailing force to the capture and subjugation of both people and lands in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. These were the sites of the longest and most expensive of the wars with indigenous people in the United States. As well, it was the only one with such a potent and effective coalition of African and Native people. On our visit to Stono, we'll have guest lecturer Dr. Simona Perry tell us of some of the ecocultural life and food ways possibly used by the rebels. We'll look at yaupon, palm cabbage, lightning whelk, garfish, oysters, kuda, palm coverings, kanapaha, and much more, and their effective uses by coalition forces in resistance to slavery. The following day, September 16th, we will have a participatory workshop and performance at Beach Institute with Step Africa and myself. So thank you for joining us in our liberation ceremonies, from the eco-cultural space of the Kanapaha to Yaupon and Buna to escape rebellion and freedom. Freedom is the heart to make revolution. Next month, we explore part 2 of oneness and completeness. What does it mean when camaraderie or loyalty outweighs ethical standards, when identity, inclusion, or diversity supersedes genuine liberty and justice? So that's it for now. Peace, power, and revolution. Which way, Savannah?